So I want to start by saying I think that we, my great technical skills here, I think that we as a climate movement have made a very grave error. We've focused almost obsessively on fossil fuels. Now that's important, and carbon is the lowest common denominator of that. We talk again obsessively about carbon. And we've not paid due attention to the other aspect, which is climate stabilising, the aspect of natural ecosystems. Because without natural ecosystems, all the biospheric cycles that hold the Gaia model together, the idea of a systemic principle on which life on Earth is based, that all starts to unwind and collapse. In other words, I'm saying that you could bring greenhouse gas emissions right down, and you could even withdraw, if possible, some kind of atmospheric CO2 and bring the concentrations down to 350 or even 300 parts per million. But without natural ecosystems, none of the biospheric cycles on which we survive will actually be sustained. And I think that is such a concern now that it's led to all sorts of policy interventions that are busily unravelling the planet in other ways, tragically under the name of climate change. So I'd like to just talk about one or two of those. First of all, you can see in the top left-hand picture what a natural rainforest ecosystem looks like. It's highly biodiverse. There are millions of species, all with interconnecting links, which you might describe as a highly complex food web. And the lowest common denominator of an ecosystem, just like for the climate change as we know it might be carbon, for ecosystems it's species. A single species is the denominator, and every time we lose one, we lose a fraction of that web. And the more we lose, the more that web breaks down, and the more likely it is that our ecosystem services, or functions as they're sometimes called, will break down with them. Now you might ask, what do ecosystem functions look like? What are they? Well, they are these biospheric cycles. The driving one, the one that we probably are most concerned about, is the carbon cycle. If you look at climate feedbacks, the things that accelerate climate change, there are about 60 plus climate feedbacks in the Earth system. And if you look at the feedbacks that actually restore climate, in other words, turn the clock back, there are less than 10. And most of those are contained within ecosystems, probably just one or two outside it, like rock weathering, which happens over tens of thousands of years. But the meaningful ones are all linked to ecosystems, and the carbon cycle is right at the centre of it. By carbon cycle, I mean the capacity of natural ecosystems to absorb atmospheric CO2, sequester it down, and lock it down in the soil. Now, as we convert natural ecosystems into plantations, so you've got on the top right an oil palm plantation, in the middle lower you've got a eucalyptus plantation in Kenya. These kinds of plantations, you don't need to be an ecologist to work out that there's hardly any biodiversity there. Monoculture stands have little room. Look at the bottom picture. There's no ground layer, there's no field layer, there's no shrub layer. It's biologically inert. And that means that the web that drives the cycles, the biospheric cycles I talked about, just isn't there. Now, to give you one example, the amount of carbon that a natural forest holds is, if you say that's 100%, a plantation holds about 4 to 20%. So it's a tiny fraction of the carbon. And yet we're under this misguided apprehension that by converting natural ecosystems into plantations, we're somehow sequestering atmospheric CO2. And we have all sorts of legislation to validate that. We have a climate bill that drives bioenergy. We have a European parliamentary bill, or the part of the climate bill is a Renewable Energy Directive, which comes from the EU. You've got at the UN level a number of pieces of legislation to do with land use change, which encourage the conversion of natural ecosystems to monoculture plantations under the guise that it actually protects us against climate change. Nothing could be further from the truth. And I'm sorry to say to the authors of the Zero Carbon Britain report that actually the idea of large-scale biomass inevitably involves natural ecosystem conversion. And even the thought that we can somehow convert our aviation kerosene into some biofuel equivalent, well, most of it will come from palm oil. Hydrogenated palm oil is the main formulation that's used in aviation, and the carbon debt for that, according to Joseph Bargioli in his peer-reviewed studies, shows an 840-year carbon debt. Now, what that means is that you'll have to not just reduce the amount of meat eating, but actually, probably the whole world would have to become vegan just so a handful of people can fly if you want to go down that route. Now, I'm getting a hint that I need to speed up here. So, I just want to say very quickly that when we convert ecosystems, we create a carbon debt, but we also lose the photosynthetic capacity of the forest that previously stood there. And it's many decades before those are returned in the form of plantations, if they're ever returned. A few pictures of what land conversion involves. You can see these are all linked to the bioenergy industry, and it's sheer devastation from a biodiversity point of view. Just look at the picture on the right there for the minute. That's Papua New Guinea, it's the Milne Bay area. You'll see in the top picture just how one of the biodiversity hotspots until the period after 1990, and just for the 15 years it's been completely devastated to produce oil palm. Well, you might think that certification is the way out. Well, in the biofuels industry, the Roundtable for Sustainable Palm Oil produced their own certification, and that's now been co-opted by the bioenergy industry, and the most unscrupulous companies are now registering their fuels as RSPO certified and using it to legitimise more deforestation. And where does this all come from? Well, look what the government's doing in this country. Well, we've got an EU target of 20% renewable energy by 2020. Our government aims to meet 30% of that by bioenergy. And in fact, just last week, Greg Barker, the new climate change minister, said that that's now going up to 50%. 50% of our renewable energy won't come from solar and wind and geothermal, tidal or wave. It'll actually come from bioenergy that is exacerbating the climate catastrophe. And if we want to look at what the incentives are, well, we've got targets, that's bad enough, but there are also financial incentives. There's an incentive called the Renewable Obligation Certificate, which offers funding for the development of so-called renewable energy. If you look at the funds going for onshore wind, the subsidies are half of what goes for a biomass power station, a power station burning wood chips and wood pellets, for energy. So we've got a situation here where we're incentivising companies to actually assume the normal directions of renewable energy, what the public might aim to have or suggest we should have as renewable energy, and we're going for large biomass power stations in its place. And we're now seeing, Biofuelwatch has got information now for a number of logging concessions. We're seeing dedicated logging concessions happening now in the Tongass Wilderness area in Alaska to produce wood chip and wood pellets specifically for the European market. We're seeing logging concessions in West Papua, in tropical forests, which actually provide wood chip and wood pellets for the European market. Logging concessions in Guyana, one of the most forested countries in South America, to produce wood chip and wood pellets for Europe. And then in the Congo Basin, we've got evidence. Again, logging concessions provided just to ensure that we can say we're producing renewable energy. And you don't need much more evidence than this. This is what the biofuel industry are doing. These are refineries around the UK. And these are the biomass power stations around the UK. Just look how many of them are at the coast. Why? Because we're going to ship all that biomass in order to burn it. We can't possibly produce even a fraction of it. Even today, with hardly any biomass burning, we only produce a fifth of our paper and wood needs. And this is a landmark paper produced by Marshall Wise last year. And it's based upon the legislation driven by the EU and the UK. And it's saying that you want to look at the black area, the black bar and the lilac bar are underneath it. And you can see how they dwindle and reduce in size up to 2060. So between now and 2060, the next 50 years, basically we sacrifice all our natural forests and natural grasslands and natural savanna for bioenergy crops under current legislation. Now, because of what Greg Barker said last week, we can probably bring that forward a decade or two. So, folks, we're in a pretty bad shape as far as climate change is concerned. I would like to request that nobody gets up to speak about climate change and talks only about fossil fuels. If we destroy the natural ecosystems that drive our life support systems, then none of us are going to be here anyway, and it won't be catastrophic climate change that brings us down. It'll probably be a collapse in our rainfall cycles. So, what to do? Well, folks, I've got a colleague at the back there called Peter. I'm just wondering if you could raise your hand or stand up, Peter, if you could. Peter has a list there and some information. If you're interested in joining us at Biofuelwatch and giving us what we offer is an email alert system, which comes out 2 to 3 times a month, so it's not heavy duty. And we ask people to sign these alerts. We put pressure on the British government, we put pressure on logging companies, we put pressure on the EU and the UN. And we look for about 10,000 signatures per alert, which, as I say, come out 2 to 3 times a month. If you're willing to sign on, that's a very helpful first step. We'll also keep you informed of demonstrations. We had a demonstration about a month ago in Portland, in Dorset. We had about 400 to 500 people, which was a phenomenal achievement, the largest demonstration that we've ever achieved for biofuels. And that's against the biofuel power station at Portland. We have a London group called Food Not Fuel. It's a grassroots group. We have grassroots groups in several places around the country. We're aiming to grow that. If those of you who are in London would like to join the Food Not Fuel group, again, talk to Pete if you would. Your help would be very, very valuable. So folks, how do we stop this? Well, it will take a grassroots movement to stop it. It will take people participating in protests. It will take responses to public consultations. It will take lobbying government. Yet I have to say that after 4 years of doing it, we've had a very low response. If anything, we've seen many of the big NGOs reverse their position and reinforce their statements about fossil fuels, almost ignoring the bioenergy disaster. So there's a lot of work to do. I am pleased to say there are also conversely a number of NGOs who have come on board and are part of this very focused battle. So I'm sorry to say it's not good news, what we're facing. But if we just did that one thing of recognising that this isn't a fossil fuel agenda, climate is about fossil fuels and ecosystems. And biological carbon does just as much damage to the atmosphere as fossil fuel carbon. Thank you.